Hello and welcome to Listen and Learn with Sudbury District Restorative Justice. I'm your host, MJ, and today we're going to be talking about cognitive distortions. Now, depending on where you are in your restorative justice journey, you've probably seen the term cognitive distortions before. When I was a newcomer to the world of restorative justice, I remember looking at this term and being confused by it. I'd seen the term pop up multiple times, but I wasn't entirely sure what it was. So today we're going to break down each and every one. There is a total of 15 of them. But before we get into that, let's look at what a cognitive distortion is at its base level. You can think of a cognitive distortion as like a thinking mistake that our minds sometimes make. They're patterns of thoughts that are usually negative or unrealistic. These thoughts can make us feel bad or anxious, even when there is no real reason to feel that way at all. For example, if you think everything is either perfect or a total failure, you may be experiencing a cognitive distortion. Or always expecting the absolute worst to happen, there's another one. Those are just a couple of examples of cognitive distortions. Recognizing and challenging these distortions can help us lead a more balanced and positive life and have a better outlook overall. Let's get into it. The first cognitive distortion we're going to look at today is black and white thinking, also known as dichotomous thinking. This is when your thought patterns assign people, things, and actions into one of two categories, good or bad. Everyone does this from time to time, myself included. For example, when you're in love with someone, they may seem absolutely perfect to you, or after a fight with someone, you might not think anything but bad thoughts about them. If you can only think of people as either entirely good or entirely bad, you might not be able to see the positive things the bad person does or the negative things the good person does. If you see everything you try as a complete success or a total failure, you may not be as likely to try new things if there's a chance you might fail. In your mind, anything less than total perfection could be exactly the same as completely failing. Mental filtering. This is actually a super common cognitive distortion in people who experience anxiety or depression, and it is known as mental filtering. Mental filtering occurs when people struggle to see the whole picture and can only focus in on the negative. Just like any other kind of filter, a mental filter lets some things through and keeps other things out. But instead of filtering water through coffee grounds, for example, a mental filter can remove all the good things from your day. In short, people with mental filters tend to focus on negative aspects while ignoring positive ones. Let's look at a couple of examples. Let's say you are a straight A student and you receive a D- on one of your reports. With this cognitive distortion, you would ignore all of the other assignments that you've received good grades on throughout the year and tell yourself that you are a horrible student. In reality, you are an intelligent individual who just didn't have the ideal results on one of your reports, and that's okay. Another example. You are a great worker who normally meets your deadlines, but you forgot to finish a report from one of your bosses. So you might think something to yourself like, I can't do anything right. Why can I never meet my deadlines? One more example. Your partner makes a mistake. We're human, it happens. When they try to make it up to you, you can only focus on what they did wrong instead of the nice things that they're doing now. These are just a few examples of mental filtering. I know that I have to catch myself with my mental filter every day, and like any of these other cognitive distortions, as we'll learn, comes with practice. Overgeneralization. Overgeneralization is a type of cognitive distortion where a person applies something from one event to all other events. This happens regardless of whether those events and their circumstances are even comparable. Overgeneralization frequently affects people with depression or anxiety disorders. It is a way of thinking where you apply one experience to all experiences, including those in the future. For example, if you once gave a poor speech You may think to yourself, I always screw up speeches. I can never speak publicly without completely messing up. Some common signs of overgeneralization include assuming the worst, believing that one mistake means that all future attempts will result in failure, negative self-talk, thinking that you can never do anything right, using language like never, always, everybody, or nobody to describe events or behaviors, and viewing one-time events as consistent patterns. A lot of people engage in overgeneralization at least sometimes. If you ever find yourself complaining that you're always the last one to get picked for a project, or that you never get any help around the house, then you yourself have overgeneralized. Jumping to conclusions. Now, if you're anything like me, you've probably heard this term a whole lot throughout your life. But what is jumping to conclusions? Jumping to conclusions is making a negative, arbitrary prediction about what others think, or trying to predict the future. For example, a friend doesn't return your FaceTime and you assume they are totally avoiding me right now, rather than maybe they're busy and forgot. Another example of jumping to conclusions would be, I'm never going to meet someone that I will fall in love with and marry and spend the rest of my life with. The truth is, we don't know that. Jumping to conclusions is one of the most common cognitive distortions out there and is particularly prevalent for people who suffer from anxiety. The fallacy of change. Those who fall victim to this cognitive distortion focus on trying to force others to change to make themselves happy. This is not a way to improve relationships or get your needs met, because other people will feel pressured into changing, even though it may not be what's best for them. They're convinced that their happiness depends on you changing because they feel entitled to make you do whatever makes them happy. This is extremely prevalent in relationships. As an example, a boyfriend believes that his girlfriend is perfect in almost every way, but she can sometimes nag. In his belief system, eliminating her nagging problem would result in his happiness, so he tries to force her to change. The result is that both of them ultimately become unhappy and break up. The always being right fallacy. If anyone else out there has ever seen the movie Matilda, you've probably heard the term that Danny DeVito says, I'm right, you're wrong, right? That is the basis of this fallacy. We are continually on trial to prove that our opinions, our thoughts, and our actions are correct. Being wrong is unthinkable, and we will go to any length to demonstrate how right we are. For example, I don't care how bad arguing with you makes me feel or makes you feel. I'm going to win this argument no matter what because I'm right and you're wrong. Being right often is more important than the feelings of others around a person who engages with this cognitive distortion, even their loved ones. And much like the previous cognitive distortions that we've already discussed, this can cause huge amounts of resentment, anger, frustration, and can result in a breakdown of relationships, even the ones closest to us. Blame game. This is one of the most common, widespread, and destructive cognitive distortions out there. But what is blaming? So, simply put, blaming is the act of assigning responsibility for something that's happened. However, it's typically associated with a negative act. You'll blame someone for breaking your favorite coffee mug, but you probably wouldn't blame someone for mowing your lawn. In most situations, blaming as a cognitive distortion involves assigning guilt or responsibility for how we feel to someone else. He makes me feel bad about myself, for instance, or she makes me feel inadequate. Blaming ultimately leads to negative emotional conditions. The person placing the blame often feels resentment, anger, or even hatred for the person they're blaming, whereas the person being blamed often gets defensive, feels hurt or angry if the blaming is vocalized or communicated in other ways. Often, blaming doesn't center around physical actions. Instead, we'll blame others for how we feel, what we think, and our negative behaviors. Personalization. Personalization is a cognitive distortion in which a person places blame on themselves in a way that is completely disproportionate to the effects of an outcome. For instance, if a family moves to a new town because one parent got a new job or a new opportunity for themselves, and their child is enrolled in a new school and they're having difficulty fitting in this new town and making friends, a parent might blame themselves for the situation. Personalization lacks emotional reasoning and can increase negative thoughts, lower self esteem, and even cause social anxiety disorders in some cases. Personalization can have adverse effects on one's well being and mental health. This mental framing can lead to poor self talk and perpetuate negative patterns of thinking. Engaging in distorted thoughts can exacerbate one's self doubt. Socially, personalization can be incredibly isolating. People might not feel comfortable around those who constantly place blame on themselves. Making judgments and decisions based on the emotions we're experiencing is a strategy many of us have been told to follow and have probably done throughout our lives. Have you ever heard the terms, go with your gut, or it just doesn't feel right, my spidey sense is telling me something, or my intuition is my best guide? These terms best capture the essence of this point of view. In some instances, this is okay, and in others, not so much. Emotional reasoning as a cognitive distortion entails inaccurately evaluating yourself and your circumstances, including people with whom you're interacting with, based on the emotions you're experiencing. For example, if you're experiencing anxiety, you may incorrectly conclude that an adverse or dangerous event is going to occur or that you will not be able to cope with the future outcome. In some cases, you may be right. However, in others, it's best to use your best judgment, including getting all the facts together first before, essentially, jumping into or out of something just based on the way that it's making you feel. There are numerous examples of catastrophic thinking in everyday life, such as excessive worry over health issues or occupational failure in school or in the workplace. Catastrophizing functions as a cognitive distortion that feeds anxiety and depression by overestimating negative outcomes and underestimating coping skills. Consequently, catastrophizers feel anxious and helpless over their perceived inability to manage potential threats. This is quite common in students, actually, myself included. I am guilty of utilizing this cognitive distortion many times during my academic career. I would be faced with an exam and I would think to myself, if I don't nail this exam 100%, I'm going into it with this negative thought of I'm going to fail. And then I think of the catastrophic outcome, which of course is unrealistic. If I don't nail this exam, I will fail out of the program, I will never get a good job, and I will never be successful. Luckily, just as events may build up to the extent where they feel catastrophic, they may be broken down and reconstructed such that they are no longer viewed as disastrous. We can take a look at the example I gave and think about it in another way. Even the most successful people in the world have failed once or twice in their lives. The fallacy of fairness. The fallacy of fairness is a cognitive distortion where people apply rigid societal norms of fairness to personal interactions, leading to frustration when outcomes don't meet their expectations of fairness. The society we live in is governed by explicit conventions and rules, laws, and regulations. These rules are black and white, cut and dry. However, complications arise when individuals attempt to apply these unequivocal societal norms to their personal interactions. The trouble lies in the fact that two people will rarely, if ever, agree entirely on what fair means within the context of their relationship. Perceived unfairness inevitably emerges when outcomes seem to favor someone else over us. It's crucial to understand that fairness is not an objective, universally agreed upon principle. In fact, it's subjective and varies from person to person. Let's look at an example. This is the case of Bob and Joanne. They are a newlywed couple. Joanne expects Bob to work his job and also contribute to household chores because that was her experience growing up. Both of her parents worked and both of them contributed to the household duties. On the other hand, Bob grew up in a household where only one parent worked while the other managed the home. Joanne frequently feels frustrated and angry due to what she perceives as Bob's indifference to what she considers mutual responsibility. Bob, for his part, feels perplexed by Joanne's expectations and doesn't understand why he should work at his job all day only to come home and work more. Both Bob and Joanne feel that they are being treated unfairly, But the reality is neither fair or unfair. It simply is. Their individual perceptions of fairness, shaped by their unique past experiences, highlight the subjective nature of what fairness really is. Heaven's reward fallacy. Heaven's reward fallacy distortion is based on the reasoning that you should be rewarded based on how hard you work. Similar to the fallacy of fairness, we will be disappointed because most things in reality aren't fair. This leads to feelings of frustration, anger, and resentment. Here's an example. You were expecting to get a promotion this year at work because of all the hard work you've done. You believe you've worked harder than the rest of your colleagues, but you didn't get the promotion. You feel resentment towards your colleague because you feel you should have been rewarded for your hard work, not them. However, there could have been many reasons why they were promoted over you. Hard work isn't the only consideration. Labeling. Labeling is a cognitive distortion that involves making a judgment about yourself or someone else as a person rather than seeing the behavior as something the person did that doesn't define them as an individual. For example, you fail a test. You might label yourself as a failure for the rest of your life. You can also label other people as well. You might decide that someone is a jerk because of one interaction and continue to judge them in all future interactions through that lens with no room for redemption. How can you combat this? Well, you can combat labeling by challenging the accuracy of your assumptions. Look for evidence that counters your negative thoughts and remind yourself of the difference between opinion and fact. Should statements. As cognitive distortions, should statements are subjective, ironclad rules you set for yourself and others without considering the specifics of a circumstance. You tell yourself things that should be a certain way with no exceptions. When it comes to yourself, you might believe you should always make your bed, or you should always make people laugh. You should be better, you constantly tell yourself. When these things don't happen, they really depend on a lot of factors, and you may feel guilty, disappointed, let down, or frustrated. You may believe you're trying to motivate yourself with these statements, such as, I should go to the gym every day. However, when circumstances change and you can't do what you should, you become angry and upset. You got out of work late and you couldn't get to the gym, just as an example. The final cognitive distortion we're going to look at today is control fallacies. What are control fallacies? Well, they're precisely that, fallacious beliefs about our control, or lack thereof, over a situation. There are two ways that these fallacies work: hypercontrol and out of control. Hypercontrol. In some situations, you may feel that you are in so much control of everything that anything that goes wrong is inherently your fault. This is similar to personalization and can lead to feeling that you've failed other people and develop a sense of guilt. You may even feel responsible for other people's behavior and thoughts and somehow believe that it is something to do with you, even when it doesn't. Out of control. On the other end of the spectrum, we have a situation in which you feel completely out of control. In this situation, you may feel that everything is outside of your control or that you can't have an impact on a situation, even though the truth is you have control over a lot of factors. In a way, you feel like you are a powerless victim of fate. It can lead to blaming others for situations where you had a degree of control or blaming luck for how things turned out, and focusing on what external forces you feel deserve the blame. For example, a person cheats and lies to their partner. When they leave, they feel that it is all the other person's fault for leaving. They think they had no control over what happened, but they failed to see how their actions affected what happened to them. And that, friends, brings us to the end of today's episode of Listen and Learn with Sudbury District Restorative Justice. As always, you can find us anywhere online at RJ Sudbury, and you can find the full list of Listen and Learn episodes at www.sdrj.ca.